Welcome to The Self-Made Theory, the podcast that's all about innovating, overcoming, and prospering. We interview founders, entrepreneurs, innovators, CEOs, and other exciting people about their amazing business journey. Over to your host, Ben Campbell, for this week's episode.
Welcome back to the podcast. Firstly, today I just wanted to thank you, our listeners, for your support for the podcast. Whether you're in Australia, where the podcast is hosted, or listening to this from one of 60 other countries where people are subscribing, thank you. I trust you're enjoying it. If you have any suggestions for people you'd like us to interview or ideas on what else you'd like to hear in the podcast, then drop us an email, podcast@theselfmadetheory.com. Into today's episode. We've heard a lot in Australia about how manufacturing is dead. Or is it? In this interview, I talked to the managing director of a company called Advanced Focus, Mark Fusco, who tells us that manufacturing isn't really dead, it's just changing, from competing on price to competing on value and design. And isn't this the way many industries are being challenged today? He talks about how that starting education early enough when new technologies come along is really critical, especially if you want first mover advantage. He talks about how we should stop saying no to new ideas and instead start asking, well, why not? And he talks also about how that we should stop eliminating all risk, because if we don't, we are going to eliminate our future. My name is Ben Campbell, and this is The Self-Made Theory. Mark, welcome to The Self-Made Theory.
Thank you, Ben. Pleased to be here.
It's good to have you on the show. And for those that don't know who Advanced Focus is, can we start with your elevator pitch?
Sure. Look, Advanced Focus work with some leading companies in a partnership way to essentially improve performance or grow and scale the businesses. We're different to, I guess, a number of service organisations where it's not just at a strategic level where we can help set a direction or a course for them, but we actually have the capacity and the capability to get our hands dirty at the tactical level. And the way we do that is our team has all come from global industry, we've all held senior roles and done things before, so we can use that experience to both help guide but also build momentum in the change and transformation of our customers. We traditionally have focused on the value creation sector, so advanced manufacturing is one of those areas, and we bring a lot of global expertise from that knowledge base. And I guess reflecting the diversity of our economy here, we've probably worked in probably 40 subsectors of those industries in Australia and some globally. And it's that diversity, I think, that often helps us see adjacent innovation and opportunity from places that would be unexpected, but because we have that visibility, we can often bring that into a new place and deliver some great value.
So you might be working in one sort of sector, looking at advanced manufacturing, and then in a completely different sector go, you know what, we learned something out of sector B over here, food and wine or something, and maybe we can take that into another area.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, for example, we have played with technology out of mining underground and brought that into defence sector. We've taken some oven technology out of the food sector and brought that into electronics. We've taken some medical device applications and we've brought that into food. So
wow.
there's I guess often we think of innovation being new creation, but often the answers exist somewhere, and sometimes how you apply that in new ways is the greatest opportunity for quick return.
Yeah, right. So let's address the elephant in the room. Most people would consider that manufacturing is dead in Australia. And if you look back perhaps at the history in South Australia, we've had particularly compared to GDP, we've had a pretty strong performance, in 20 or so years ago. And comparatively with the rest of Australia, we've sort of battered higher than average in terms of our manufacturing output. But that's obviously changed a lot over the last 10, 15 years. Why is manufacturing something that Australia should continue to do?
Look, at the heart of it, what we believe, we think that in terms of economic value to any advanced economy, you need to make things.
Yep.
You need to create value. Manufacturing is such an important sector for that. Typically, for every job in manufacturing, it generates something like 4 or 5 others in an economy like Australia. That's a big multiplier. You don't get that out of mining. You don't get that out of services. Often, we think that when all jobs are equal, but they're not. And so when we see some jobs like cutting hair or doing nails, if we're all doing that for each other and someone's a barista in the corner, is the economy really going to grow? Whereas once we start to create highly valuable solutions that can be made, not only does it avoid us importing those things from a long way away, but it also gives us the opportunity to export those. And I think there's a reason why countries around the world prize their manufacturing industries and really support them, and that's because they understand how valuable this is for the total performance of the economy.
So we first met, I think, at a presentation you did down at Flinders University, actually, and I was super surprised at what was happening here in South Australia around advanced manufacturing. Is that a different beast compared to what we would call traditional manufacturing? Sort of large-scale, non-customised, products like cars and fridges and other things.
Look, I think there's no question manufacturing is changing. I think sometimes we get caught up in the way that we measure things, and those measurements often need to change. So things like the way that we measure our sectors, what is manufacturing, what is service, and how they blur now is actually one of the challenges for governments. They can't always see exactly what's happening. But I'd say that on the whole, we've seen some traditional large manufacturers. I call them large sheds. These are the ones that hit the front page of the newspaper or the TV when they close and people walking out. That image burns deep in most people's minds, and for their parents looking at those things, they're not going to tell their kids to go into that industry because they don't think there's a future. Those companies on the whole, were competing on price, and Australia is now a high-cost economy. So one of the reasons that manufacturing is changing is the cost base of which we have a quality of life where we earn decent money. We don't want to change that situation, but we do need to change how we compete and the way that we produce things so that is not an impediment. So the examples that I shared last year, we've got fortunately some fantastic businesses in Adelaide that are producing world-class products exporting to the world. Companies like Red Arc, companies like SMR, companies like Schneider that were used in those examples. They are not competing just on price. Price is an element of value, but they're competing in a number of different ways where they're leveraging value creation and they're capturing that in clever solutions with their products and exporting them to the world.
Yeah, right. And so what changes in the industry that feeds into advanced manufacturing? So I'm thinking particularly around things like what roles do governments play and how do they change to support the industry compared to perhaps what we saw maybe here with Holden in South Australia, where the government pumps a bunch of cash in, and several years later they're no longer here.
Yeah, look, it's tough. I feel for governments in that they're always facing very tough decisions in terms of do they help an industry that's in trouble to allow it to have a soft landing or extend its life, or do they let it die? And it's tough because I think in today's environment where we've got media live all the time, very short cycles, we don't always get out of the sound bites the real story. And I know for people that are not intimate with some of these industries, they hear this is a lot of money, but in the context of the economy and in the context of the amount of value it brings the economy, governments do those calculations. They give the money for a good reason, but often that isn't translated into the community and the way that they perceive what's going on. Look, industries live and die, and you can't prop them forever, but sometimes governments strategically have to take decisions to buy time so that we don't have significant shedding of skilled jobs where we get mass migration as a consequence, or worse, we lose those skills out of the economy, because the automotive sector, as an example, was certainly a fantastic input into the business community on a whole, and it doesn't matter what industry we work in these days, we're always coming across people with some aspect of auto in their businesses that's contributing value to them.
So if you're a holder of the government purse strings and handing out the cash, what would you do differently today?
Yeah, that's a very hard question for someone like me. I think education is a critical part of this.
Yeah.
I think so
education where? Re-education or new education, or focus in particular areas?
It needs to be in multiple areas,
Yep.
because there's a number of elements that need to be played with. One is that as the economy changes, it's extremely difficult to build a large manufacturing company again. Just the sheer difficulty in this environment to do that is going to make that a very unusual thing to happen. So we've got existing manufacturers that are very good. We should help make them great.
Yep.
We should help them transition from being a size to a bigger size, because they will pull others along with them, and in terms of supply chain. In terms of innovation and things like that, I think when I look at the technologies that are coming, the technologies that are maturing, in many cases we're not yet teaching those things, certainly not at university level. So how we tap that knowledge, how we accelerate the transfer of knowledge and the value of those skills into the economy is an important, I think, policy area for the future. These things are often sub-economic for universities when they first look at them, because industry don't know they need them. The university doesn't have demand, therefore it's not economic. Whereas the reality is, in 3 years' time, when that technology is mature, everyone will want it. But the first mover advantage for the economy is lost. So it's trying to sort of not pick winners, but certainly look at how we can get closer to that cycle, or how we can try and innovate things that don't take 3 years to develop a curriculum.
So there's a real timing piece here, isn't there? Because you've got the education piece in terms of growing the workforce that's capable, and then you've got industry actually having the jobs and producing. Which comes first? And how do you balance those two things together? And that's really a question for many companies, but probably more so in manufacturing, I assume, because of ramp-up times and tooling times, etc.
Skills take time to build, and often longer to build a return. When we look at scaling companies, a couple of things we're really looking at. One is how we systemise what we do, but actually in advance of that, if we think in terms of what is it that we're going to create, it's those products often and the way that they go to market. That's where a lot of success is happening today. And we've seen some amazing companies come from nowhere. So I know there's definitely been a strong focus on startups within the ecosystem here.
Yeah.
Startups are a very important part of the fabric of change, right? Because they bring exciting new ideas, but they're also tough to get on the ground. They often don't succeed for lots of different reasons when you start new businesses. But how to inject some of that startup mentality, and how do we help those companies that say are on a trajectory that they've chosen for themselves, where they are doing great things. And I guess one of the things that we've chosen to do is recognise those companies through a program called the Impact Awards, where we can help identify those businesses and help give them, I guess, some profile, some recognition, some appreciation for what they're doing, but also within the business community here, try and build a let's say an alumni, a network of industry leaders that recognise that these companies are an important part of the future of this economy, and how can we perhaps share a little bit of our expertise to support them. And so we have industry ambassadors doing that, and I think for me, I'm extremely encouraged by the business seeing the value in doing that, and some of these companies have gone on to amazing things from being recognised, and we certainly want to try and shift the balance, I guess, in terms of perception in the economy, that whether we can or we can't, is that it's actually in our heads that determines that. Too often, I think we get caught up in, oh, that's a new technology, we wouldn't do that here, or you can't do that in Australia because of certain reasons or beliefs. Part of what I genuinely believe we have to think through is, and ask perhaps more often, is why not, right? Because we live in one of the best places of the world in terms of an environment to live and bring up kids and the quality of life. What we don't always have are those world-leading companies being generated. And but what do companies need? They need the best people. What do the best people need? Beyond money, they need a great place to live. So we have those, and I think sometimes we just take for granted those things. We think we have to go elsewhere for those things, or buy those things elsewhere, and not give it a chance. So I guess that's an area where both industry and government policy can, help cultivate an environment where, if we're going to take a risk with something new, why wouldn't we try and do that here if we're first? Because if we could, then maybe that solution could be exported to other places around the world. And I think sometimes we're the last to pick those things up, and we see that often with large investments where there's a lot of learning going on, but it's not in this country.
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting dilemma for our thinking, isn't it? Because it's not just about saying why not, but it's also then pushing around there might be some genuine reasons why not. And some of that might be down to our desire for particular lifestyles, etc. But you sometimes need to push beyond that and think, well, if we can't do it because of that reason, is there another way to achieve it? Or is there some other way we can come up with some other innovation that makes it able to be done here? Mm-hmm.
Look, I think very good question. Look, there's always going to be in every economy, by the way, the belief that I actually don't want to grow, that I'm actually comfortable where I am. I'm not talking about those sort of companies or lifestyle businesses.
That's not you and me, no. And that's not our listeners.
No. What we're talking about is the companies that actually really want to do this, and how do we make it easy? How do we make it Teflon for them to be successful? How do we identify role models to inspire people to believe it can be done here? And look, I've got a lot of time for people like Yaron Roos and Jana Matthews. Both of those are international leaders in innovation. They've spent a lot of time in places like Silicon Valley, Stockholm, with some incredible businesses. And when I've asked them the question, what's holding us back? What is it that we don't see here that we see in these other places? And it's visible role models.
Yep.
We actually don't have a lot of those. I think culturally in Australia we like to, if we're doing well, just keep the head down and don't toot the horn, and someone might work out what I'm doing and do it better.
I interviewed Jana a few episodes ago, and she talked exactly to that point. Yeah.
No, so on that basis, part of this is to try and help some of these companies be seen. It always amazes me when a company gets exposed to business leaders that is unknown. Often the words are, I had no idea that could be done here. I didn't think that was possible. These are the sort of things that actually challenge our mindset to do something different.
So have you got some examples of that, and maybe some of the winners of your Impact Awards?
Yeah. Look, I think as an example, there was a company that developed a medical management system similar to what we've rolled out into our hospital here, but not theirs, that manages all these patient records and controls and so forth. They've now listed on the stock exchange, and they're winning business internationally with their software. We're not using it in Adelaide, but we are using it in other places. And the belief, why would we choose this system over an American or a European system? It's often belief. Defence the same. We've been working with some drone companies where the Americans or the English will buy our drones, but not the Australian Defence Force, because it's not that the product isn't good enough. It's just perhaps an unconscious bias that sometimes we think if it's here, maybe it's not good enough.
So there are people that will have dealt with government tenders and other things over the years. I know I've certainly dealt with my fair share of them, that have often the tendering process has an element of, is it sourced locally, is it sourced is it manufactured locally, and you get some points for that in the system. But is that a bit of a furphy?
Look, for me, I'm very sensitive towards, let's call it local business tax, where we have to do this almost like to tick a box or something like that. I don't like that. It doesn't encourage. It's like a form of protectionism, and I think the world's much more open place, and we need to be competitive. I think what we do need to think about is where are the areas where we want to create competitiveness? Where are the areas where we actually need to create new solutions for problems that haven't been solved? And if those things are hard to do, right, and they're risky, these are the areas that potentially have got the opportunity to create IP, and that IP could be valuable on a global base for if the problem's solved. So almost become the lead customer. The challenge, I think, is culturally we don't generally forgive anybody who takes a chance and it doesn't work. I mean, I don't think there's too many.
Crucify them.
I don't think there's too many ministers or prime ministers that go, hey, we put a bet on this because if we crack the nut and we got it right, this would be a really great outcome for the country. When politicians are forced to basically eliminate all risk out of a decision, they ultimately eliminate most of that opportunity that goes with it.
That's a good point, isn't it?
So we've got to be comfortable to take risks, I think, as a culture, and we've got to, I think, as media's got a role to play in allowing that piece of education to play out and create a safe place to try some things, because often when we try things, that's when we learn, and too often. And
that's and often you've often heard the statement, let's not use the word fail, let's use the word learn, and look, I think it's a great one, and if we think about investment that venture capital firms make, etc., they don't get it right every single time.
No. But they know the game.
But that's the game, and they know that maybe 3 out of 5, maybe 4 out of 5, maybe 2.5 out of 5, whatever the number comes up at. But they know that that's the way to really see greatness come out of companies and ideas.
Well, look, it's if there's no risk, there's rarely reward, and I guess we have such an opportunity, I think, to generate intergenerational reward. Reward that goes beyond our lifestyle, the legacy that we lead, for our children, our children's children, and I think sometimes good can be the enemy of great. I think we have we think things are good, but it's good because others before us have actually taken those decisions and helped create the environment we have. I think sometimes we don't always get that context. We don't always connect what we've got to those risks that were taken, and but also that it's our responsibility, I believe, and that's not just the politicians. I think it's the community, it's the business community, to ask this question, and that is, what are we leaving for the next generation? Are we going to live in a better place? Have we got jobs? Have we got economies? Have we got an environment that's in a better state because of the things that we've done during our time? And I think sometimes we think, certainly politically, very short term because of the cycles, but equally we don't allow and don't reward people to think long. And when they do, they're criticised for saying, "Oh, that's 3 elections away." That's just a smokescreen. Whereas the reality is, we need to think that far ahead. Other countries are thinking that far ahead, and they're gaining huge benefits from being able to plan things over a longer period.
I mean, the political cycle is a problem in many countries in the world, but they don't have the same unbelief and lack of, lack of desire for greatness that perhaps we do. You talked a little bit about the next generation. So for parents listening to this whose children are choosing their subjects, their university courses, etc., or have just done that for this year, where would you recommend that they focus?
Again, very challenging question. Look, with the work that we're doing, we're playing with some amazing technologies, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, 3D printing, very transformational in the way that they are going to affect the jobs of the future. 2 things that I would say are important and unfortunately not always easy for parents to work out. I think sometimes we have a natural bias to look at we would have aspired for ourselves, or our parents' influence on us over our time, and we look to say a lawyer or a doctor and go, oh look, they're great roles, you have a great life, those types of things. But some of those areas are genuinely changing and in a dramatic way.
I mean, I was only talking to someone today about the legal field, and with the rise of artificial intelligence, is that the end of the paralegal? Is the role of the lawyer going to change so dramatically that we're going to need a lot less of them, because all of the casework, all the research, all the other stuff's going to be done by artificial intelligence?
Look, when I try and explain it, I look at it in two ways. Look, I'm a STEM advocate. I believe in the technical skills, and there's no question that we need people who can make the machines. Okay, so we need really smart, proper, clever research scientists, engineers to do that and to execute on that really well.
But that's only going to be a small portion of people, isn't it?
It's a portion.
Yep.
Right? Most people work inside machines. Okay, and those machines today are the jobs that we have. Could be how we use a computer, for example. We don't need to have STEM to work out how to use it, but then what we do with that computer is really important.
Yeah.
So computers are really good at some things, right? And in the case of artificial intelligence in particular, if we look at the tasks that are, I always break it down into three things. In the physical world, we say if it's dull, it's dirty, or it's dangerous, it's going to be up for grabs for automation. Okay? If it's dirty, no one wants to do it. If it's dangerous, society's not going to let anyone do it. And if it's dull, a computer can probably do it better because it's a mundane task. We've got to think about that also for office jobs, and it's probably that's probably the first time we're going to see a shift in jobs where these technologies can definitely take away the dull. So if we think about jobs where the bulk of the work is very, let's say, repetitive and calculation or algorithm based, those types of jobs, for example, searching for information, grouping information, adding up things, all of those sort of tasks can definitely be augmented by automation. That doesn't take away the human factor, the face-to-face time, the influence that's needed for the top ends of those fields. And lawyers probably in the future, certainly at the top end, will become more valuable because they can leverage that information more quickly, more cheaply than ever,
Yep.
and become more valuable.
Yep.
And that'll apply to many professional services fields. So I'd encourage that we think also about the creative side, that we think about what are the environments that we create that allow people to think outside the square, to play to our strengths as humans, because those things are much harder for machines to do.
And I was listening to a podcast this morning actually on artificial intelligence, and they talked about the other roles that have compassion at their core and those things, which you hope never get replaced by machines. But clearly those are going to be roles that are going to continue to be important into the future as well.
There's no question. Humans have some amazing capacities at the moment that just are unlikely to be replaced by automation. And part of that is also what we believe, right? And we accept as society. We have a choice, right? If we don't want the chatbot, if we prefer the personal thing and we're prepared to pay for it, then society will choose. And I think sometimes when we're trying to predict the future, we look at things like this and go, the fear sets hold. I look at it much more the other way. I see opportunity everywhere in terms of what an exciting place for the future where things will change. We need to teach people, of course, how to adapt to that change. We need to create environments where we continue to learn and teach people to learn. And I know we're certainly doing that in a number of good universities and schools, but we have to accept that that is the way, but not to be afraid of those things, and try and hang on to the past so much, because I look at things like, I think in 10 years we went from riding horses to driving cars, and for the people that were building cars, it was really good, right? The people driving the cars, even better.
The dude making buggy whips.
Buggy whips. Well, it's funny. There's still a buggy whip maker today, and he makes a good margin, right? But the reality is the vast majority had to transition. And so there's always winners and losers. And I think when we think about the shift in the economy, it will be significant and profound. But with every significant and profound shift, great productivity comes from this technology, and great wealth with it. And I think we've got to accept that there's a shift. We can see it, and we don't want to be at the wrong end of that shift. And that's probably the most important thing. Have the eyes open for that.
I do like the notion that we are actually more in control than we think we are, and a lot of that comes down to how we use our wallet and the way in which what we're happy to accept and pay for, and what we're not happy to accept and pay for, because we can't have cheap and commoditised and low service.
No, we have a choice.
We have a choice.
So it seems funny. Technically, there'll be aspects of the economy, whatever it is, that will have those extreme views, right? They will exist in the future economy. It'll be a segment. It may not be everything, because we choose what that will ultimately be. I mean, I look at, when I was growing up as a kid trying to work out, what my career was going to be, robots were coming and computers were coming, and they were going to take all our jobs, right? So I started learning computers and, playing with this stuff on the side, and at the time thinking, there was genuine fear about the future and what opportunities would really be there. But the reality's turned out very different.
Of course it is. I mean, unemployment's probably as good as it's ever been. It's probably better than it was back then.
So yeah, I think from that side, I think we there's probably more. It's more being aware rather than fearful, and I think more open to change. Because I think the thing that gives me great encouragement for the future, is the kids of today, as they're learning these new things, they adapt and adopt so quickly because they don't have to unlearn. I think the hard ones that suffer often are us with the grey hairs, right?
We haven't got that many grey hairs.
There's a couple here, and for every one of them, these are lessons in life you've learned that sometimes you have to unlearn to seize the opportunity. And I think for us older people in the economy now, it's recognising that is this really a problem, or is it just a problem for us? And is it our belief system that's actually limiting our ability to see those opportunities?
Well, plus our experience, and plus what we've seen before. Those are all factors that influence our decisioning making.
They do.
And the perfect scenario is not old or young. The perfect scenario is both, because when you have young people working with those more experienced, you get the balance of ideas, risk, things that have come before, new ways of thinking, challenges, and you build those two things together, and you'll ultimately get a better outcome.
Without a doubt. When we're making radical changes with the use of technology or change in an environment, we often try and build teams where we have that mix of experience and youth. The youth, because they can, they're hungry, they're not inhibited or threatened by the change. If it's an easier way, we're up for it. And for the older, more experienced in the team, to use that wisdom to guide the enthusiasm of youth. And I think in our business environment where change is prevalent, mixing that diversity of views becomes really important. If we're all one or the other, it can be a problem.
So what technology excites you the most? If you can't pick one, give me a couple.
Okay, it's hard. As a tool maker, I would say, the 3D printing for me has been absolutely incredible. The stuff that can be made. In particular, I love making things out of metal, and having, I guess, that ingrained in the DNA, all of the old ways of doing things, to see how it can be done now and how amazing the products are and the value and solutions they create. It is absolutely transformational.
So what excites you about that? Is it the speed at which things can be built? Is it the flexibility or the diversity? What is it particularly about 3D printing?
It compresses value chains, so it definitely, speed is an aspect where you're shifting value and you're shifting where that gets created. And for me, that's exciting in terms of how it will change what we do. So instead of, for example, making a pattern, doing a casting, machining the casting, which could take months, you can do this, technically overnight for some things.
So it's the change from traditional, where one company designed it, somebody tooled it, somebody built it, etc., being sort of compressed into the one organisation or the one process.
In some cases, that can definitely occur, and I think for that reason, it changes speed. So, for example, working with the Navy last week in Sydney, they've just rolled out 3D printers on their new destroyers. And so for them, it's about, well, what tools do we need? Do we bring one of everything? We don't know. But now we can print on demand. It could be a spare part that keeps us going until shore, or it might be a tool or something, a fixture or something that we couldn't envisage we need. And so, to me, that's
cool.
It's very cool, right? And you think about the courage it takes for senior people in Navy to sort of sign those things off and say, hey, look, the benefits are worth the risks of doing this. That's what I'm talking about. That's changes value. The other is around, I think, for me, being a knowledge business, the use of AI. I think an Internet of Things in terms of connectivity. Those, we've got sensors, dropping in price at an exponential rate. We've got connectivity, everywhere. The cost of storage is almost zero. Processing power is improving at twice the speed every 2 years. So we've got all of this convergence going on where information will be everywhere, and it goes beyond our ability to crunch it in an Excel spreadsheet. So developing, I guess, intelligence algorithms that can help us harness that information to understand things that we could never understand before, I think is going to be one of the most tremendous transformations in the way that we do things. And we've only just scratched the surface of that.
Many people are scared about AI and about unleashing the decision making for important things on computers and taking the safety valve out for important things. Are you in that camp? Do you see risks and concerns and fears around AI, or do you think we're a long way from that?
Yes and no. What I see is, if you look at the dashboard of your car today, it tells you the speed, a fuel light comes on, it tells you you're going to need fuel soon, right? That's information. How we choose to act on that information, where humans are in control. What I'm talking about is having dashboards for things that matter to us. In terms of automating those decisions, there's lots of mundane decisions that if we set the rules, as in humans, set the rules that we want for us, then again, I'm not so concerned about those things. Where there is genuine, I guess, risk and importance to your question is in the defence area. I think there's no question it's a new weapon. It's no question that if people want to build war machines with this technology, we don't know the outcomes. And I guess it's a bit like viruses and things like that people create as weapons. We never want to unleash them on society. And I have no doubt that people are working on those. I genuinely hope that we don't suffer the same things that we have with chemical weapons and nuclear weapons.
Yeah, that's certainly a risk. Hopefully, there's still a big red button somewhere that somebody has to push with some multiple keys that have to be turned with different people, etc. before they can launch a
big emergency stop or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Look, I think the upside for society is far greater. Assuming that we can live harmoniously, and look, I think none of us can predict the future, but I do hope that in terms of the ethics that we apply to these things, that we as a society choose to I guess enforce and reinforce the importance of those things. And I think on the whole we are doing that despite the weapons of mass destruction we have. But I find sometimes it can really polarise people's thinking, because we think it could be used for evil, therefore we don't want to apply it for good. Yeah. And there's so much good that can be applied. It will save lives. It will improve quality of life. It will improve our health. It'll reduce the costs of living. It will make us happier. There's so many things for good it can do, and I think sometimes we let that negative piece sort of just cloud our ability to even consider it.
It's not a yes or no. It's not
No.
yes, we're doing it, or no, we're not doing it. It's a how do we accentuate the positives and bring those to life quickly while minimising the potential risks that sit around it.
And some of those things may help us become better humans, because if we have greater transparency in what we do and trust in the information that we now have, then maybe we can be better as a society. I mean,
That's probably a whole nother topic to talk about.
yes, it is, and I don't mean in the way that some countries are thinking about it. But,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, mate, thank you very much for spending some time with us and talking about what I think is pretty exciting. I mean, when I heard your presentation, I was like, wow, I didn't realise all of that was happening just here in South Australia, let alone the work that you're doing around the country in advanced manufacturing. It's pretty exciting. And I think it gives us a lot of hope and in the future for the things that we make here in this country.
Excellent. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks, mate. Well, that certainly throws a different light on the opportunities for cities like Adelaide, where traditionally we've had a strong, big end of town manufacturing industry. I'll be watching this sector pretty closely over the coming months. There's lots of exciting things happening. If you're interested, just Google Brabham BT62 supercar, which is being built right here. If you want to find out more about this episode or would like to know how to connect with Mark and Advanced Focus, then head over to our website www.theselfmadetheory.com. Some of you may know that this podcast is a labour of love. We fund all the production costs ourselves and it was never intended to be a money-making venture. I'm just passionate about helping entrepreneurs and businesses. Well, that's what I do in my paid day job in my business advisory practice. And the podcast is one way for you to hear real stories about what it's like to build and grow a business. All we ask from you is that if you're enjoying the podcast, then please give us a rating or a comment in your favourite podcast app. It would mean a lot. Until next time, keep innovating, overcoming and prospering.